it is often difficult. I will say when you're looking at investors, I want you to think of the long time frame. Think of it as building relationships. You make your case, you give your pitch, you stay in contact. If they give you feedback, you iterate, you stay in contact. I think that's sort of the mindset you're going to have. And of course, you're going to have to make many pitches. Don't get discouraged. You're going to have to make a lot of iterations, changes on your deck, your materials in general. And this current market is kind of unpredictable. But if you can weather it out, and maintain those relationships over time, as you continuously improve, you can have a potential for a decent next stage, whether it's an exit or getting the funding that you desire.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Gilder Spotlight podcast. Today we have a interesting guest, Gadareth Higgs, originally from the Bahamas. Now he's based in Connecticut, has a background at Yale, biomedical background, but now he is a investor. So it's very interesting to kind of have the investor's perspective on the podcast. We typically have a lot of startup founders, but Gad, if you can give us a quick background about yourself to our listeners, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Gadareth Higgs, I go by Gad, and I'm currently the senior analyst, investment analyst at Grandeur. And so they were originally based in doing like mortgage-backed securities and real estate. That's where they made a lot of their money, and now they're moving into life sciences and healthcare investments. So you can think of them as a collection of family offices, and they reach out to me through their managing director, Andy Shabo, who connected with me through a life sciences group that I'm a part of called the Bullpen. And so Andy reached out to me, and I was a part of the bullpen based on my role as principal of Higgs Insights, where I help healthcare and life sciences startups with fundraising, research, and scaling. So it's kind of a lot to digest, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Definitely. Just
But
curious though,
yeah.
how do you get invited to those roundtables? Did you find it online or did you kind of get like an invite
So
to
yeah,
host?
that's a very good question. I think it's instructive too. I was actually doing client outreach or client acquisition for Higgs Insights. And so I have a mechanism of going through LinkedIn, reaching out to contacts for that. And I reached out, I ended up connecting with Brian C. of the Conifay Group. And he was the one who told me about the bullpen. He said, he was on one of their panels. At one point, he got a lot of responses from the people who were a part of that group afterwards. So he recommended trying to reach out to them to see if I can talk about my services there. And I reached out, and they actually, um, I, I found it interesting their perspective in terms of like what they offer their members, and I just ended up becoming a founding member of the group. And I've just been attending practically all of their events. They do it every Wednesday, their virtual events every Wednesday since like about October of last year. And I've found it a great opportunity to one, just connect with people, two, kind of refine your way of pitching without like direct selling, and three, just being able to really provide value even outside of your own client acquisition, having a client directly working with them.
Very cool. Well, I want to kind of go to your background. You're from the Bahamas. And did you always want to kind of get in the investor venture capital world, kind of focus on biotech, or what did you originally kind of want to be, when you're growing up?
Man, I mean, that's a great question. Back, let me take it to undergrad. When I was in undergrad, I was a biochem bioinformatics major, and I was the first Bahamian to attend Ramapo College of New Jersey, at least directly from the Bahamas that they know of. So the actually the president at the time was Bahamian. He was trying to recruit Bahamian, so I was the first that he had recruited. So you can tell from the biochem bioinformatics background that I'm kind of more of a science nerd, essentially. And so I had gunned on either I was thinking between either MD, PhD, or PhD. And so that was my initial take on it. And so after undergrad, I actually went home to the Bahamas and ended up working about a year after I graduated. I ended up working at this oil company in the Bahamas called Borco, so Bahamas Oil Refining Company. It had recently been purchased by Vopak Terminals, which is it's a Dutch oil and storage holding company. And they had gone in on it with a private equity firm called First Reserve. So this happened around, I think it was like middle of 2008 is when they made the purchase. I came on around 2009. I think it was April 1st. Coincidentally, literally, the anniversary when I started at Borco.
2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting time to start too with just with the the housing bubble and everything like that. Uh,
That's yeah, yeah, yeah. But that company actually my experience at that company, I should say, really pretty much changed my trajectory to answer your question. So I went into that like pre-med, you know, pre-med, MD, PhD, that sort of route. And I still ended up continuing the research track to get the PhD, but the experience of doing consulting was eye-opening for me. I really enjoyed continuous improvement, systemization, and that sort of thing. So I wanted to do that even more so. So while I was at the terminal, I helped them sell for about three times the purchase value. So they were purchased for 550 million middle of 2008, helped to essentially improve their audit score, improve their KPIs. So they got sold for 1.7 billion in early 2011. But I just wanted to translate that consulting aspect into more into life sciences and healthcare. So that's when I went off to Yale, as you mentioned earlier. So I got my master's there. Eventually used that in the lab of the PI who coined the term riboswitch, Ronald Breaker, and I used that to essentially double the number of rabbit switches in his lab. And he was such a great advisor, and I was so motivated that I was able to qualify within a year. Usually it took two in that program, and graduate within four. Usually it took six.
wow.
Um,
Wait, sorry.
and
What exactly was this program
this
at
was
Yale?
the molecular biology program after
Okay.
getting the bioinformatics master's.
Wow, that's that's amazing. And just curious, as far as maybe like the work ethic or like the strategy of as far as retaining information and getting through a program that fast, were there any methods or tools that you do to kind of get through everything optimally?
Yeah, you some may know the Pomodoro principle or Pomodoro technique, where you essentially you work for 50 minutes, take a 10-minute
Oh
break,
yeah.
jump at it again. Yeah, I did that in lab. I got to the point where, well, first of all, you need a team, you need people, and so you need to figure out what you need to be doing. So going into the lab, I actually aligned on what was probably one of the most important projects the lab was having.
Mhm.
So I had a high impact project. I had the buy-in of the PI. I had the support of the team. Once I had gotten the skill set down in terms of what the exact process I would be doing, it was just a matter of iterating and just doing it as efficiently as possible. And I'm very fastidious when it comes to like taking notes. So I just would record, hey, today I did tasks. I did 10 major tasks. And it would be like a thing with me to just try and get as many possible. If I had a really productive day, let's say I did maybe like 20 or so tasks that were relevant to me graduating and getting my thesis done. And so when it came down to me like honing my thesis, I remember some days I got up to like over 20 or so tasks, right? And so it was just a matter of like getting the team behind you, knowing what you needed to do, and doing it as efficiently as possible, and keeping track of what you're doing, because essentially uh, you cannot control what you do not record or keep track of. And so those would be some of the techniques I would say.
Wow. And just curious, what was because I guess condensing it down by, a whole entire it's like a third of the time or you did it in two-thirds of the time essentially.
Exactly.
So condensing it down like that, what was an average day like when you're going through your master's?
Yeah, yeah. Well, through the PhD, I think is what the
Or
part you
excuse me, the
wanna.
PhD. Excuse me,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
PhD.
yeah. No worries. So with an average day, kind of hard to say because I finished in 2021, so you know what that means.
Right.
So the average day in the last 2 years of that program were a lot different from the average days before that. But luckily, at that point, I'd gotten to not necessarily needing as much interaction or guidance from other people because I knew what I was doing. So I was able to work from home as a bioinformatician in a molecular biology lab, and that allowed me to be super efficient. So, you know, an average day would be one within the last 2 years being concerned about catching COVID, particularly, you know, especially at the time when they didn't have a vaccine or any sort of really good treatments. That would have been the average day around then. But simultaneously, I was in front of my computer just doing what I needed to do
Mhm.
to get my work complete.
Got it. Well, kind of the root of the question would be like, do you have some type of routine,
Yeah,
or like
absolutely.
how do you kind of get yourself in that flow state where you're optimal,
Yeah,
bunch of work
so
done?
that's a good reframing of it. So essentially, what I would have done within the last something I kind of adopted, uh, particularly in the last part of grad school, was like a daily exercise regimen. So, and I found that when I exercised early on in the day, it led me to sleep a lot better at night. Sometimes if I exercise, particularly if I go for a long run or a hard run too close to bedtime, it would throw me off. So to frame my average day, my regular day now, based on that, I would get up, exercise. I either go for a run or maybe do some resistance workout, take a shower, jump in front of my computer, and let's say like read a bunch of papers and or work on my pipeline for discovering ribo switches, which are these genetic control elements in bacteria. Um, or and let's say work on that until using the Pomodoro principle, as I mentioned. 50 minutes, 10-minute break, 50 minutes, 10-minute break. Get a quick lunch, try to cram lunch in maybe 20 to 30 minutes max. And then jump back at it until usually let's say six o'clock, almost time for dinner, pretty much. And so that was like once I was done with classes, I was able to really hone in and focus on my research and really be productive.
Got it. And then as far as right after your PhD, because you finished in 2021, and that was kind of an interesting time for everything. I'm assuming was your first, position after your PhD, was it a remote position? What did you right when you finished your
Yeah,
PhD?
so I was part of that batch that joined, and I think it was like June, I think towards that June 25th-ish or so of 2021 at McKinsey that didn't get to travel the way a typical consultant, or I
Mhm.
should say, wasn't obligated to travel the way a typical consultant would travel. So literally for the first year I worked at McKinsey, I did not travel on the company dime. In fact, I went into the office for um, maybe not I didn't even go into the office too much within that first year. Definitely not within the first few months. And so my first couple of projects were remote, as you're guessing. And during that time, I worked mostly in healthcare and life sciences, given my background and also my interests. I had the opportunity to do things like a product launch strategy, doing the kind of like the financial modeling for projections. I also did lots of due diligences. So, like when you're looking at assets for potential acquisition, usually by private equity firm. I also did things such as like a medical transformation towards the end, where I helped biopharma essentially double their their ability to provide treatment uh, just with the same number of MSLs or medical science liaisons. just through one identifying their care gaps, prioritizing their care gaps, and then just applying that to like shuffle people around to make sure you get those
Right.
care gaps. So
I know
yeah,
there's a lot of folks in kind of that do higher ed that uh end up consulting. And oftentimes what they learn in higher ed is obviously consulting is you kind of have to be a jack of all trades almost. You have to understand the business component of things, and you also have to be a high level expert in whatever the company is doing, whatever industry that company is in. But was there any kind of training that McKinsey or any of these, big three consulting firms do, um,
yeah,
you really get high level employees or, highly educated employees coming in, to understand how to consult and how the
yeah.
business is
They had some training on the front end. When you join, there's like an orientation process you go through for a few weeks, where you learn the basics of you can somewhat expect in consulting and best practices, and they give you opportunities to take advantage of training modules in Excel, PowerPoint, and Tableau, and others. Um, and so they have it on the front end, but then also they have dedicated training days or where they say like, okay, you need to pick um well, dedicated training amounts that you need to do like over regular intervals for one. And in addition to that, they had dedicated like service days is what I was referring to. But as for training, you're expected to do continued training on certain things. Of course, some of the big things include, particularly in healthcare, life sciences, like privacy, security, health information, that sort of thing. You also were given more along the lines of things such as soft skills that you might want to hone in on, crafting your message, and so those are some of the things that you typically work with. The consultant toolkit that they try to get you to hone really consists of maybe about six elements, if I can recall. Really your ability to present slides through PowerPoint, your ability to do Excel modeling, your ability to do really problem solving, and that's usually like you get in a meeting and we discuss how we're going to break down this problem and attack it. Um, something an EM, a great EM of mine told me too that they look for as a part of it is also the ability to do fast iterations on things. So like you get something, you quickly turn it around and get it back to either your EM or senior leader. Yeah, those are some of the big ones. And then of course, like you have under problem solving, you have conceptual. You also have like analytical or like quantitative. Um, and then yeah, and then a lot of it
I feel like those are
otherwise
a
is
lot
like
of the skills they should have taught us.
your client hands too, right?
Right, right. I
Exactly.
think a lot of those skills they really should have taught us in kind of K-12 education rather than like, memorizing and regurgitating information. Like how can you interpolate data in Excel? Like how
Yeah,
can you, create a good PowerPoint presentation? How can you speak to people or, anyone from, a 5-year-old to your 63-year-old grandmother can understand? Like these type
absolutely.
of skills I think are very important. And I'm glad that you bring up kind of the methods that, some of these big consulting firms do to train high level consultants because it makes a lot of sense. Uh,
Absolutely.
but yeah, so and another thing to think about, kind of considering your timeline, uh, 2022 November was around the time when like AI started to kind of blow up. Did AI kind of change your work? Were you still at McKinsey when ChatGPT kind of took over the world in November 2020?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was
kind of
towards the beginning
change your
part of it. Yeah.
methods.
Um, and so yeah, one ChatGPT, I remember I first learned about it through I listened to BBC podcasts daily, and I think they were the ones who started telling me about it. I was like, huh, this is quite interesting. But it really struck home when a partner I was working with, great advisor, mentioned to me that, you should check it out. I think they're uh, think I think we should be incorporating this. I mean, you should check it out and you should try and use it and get familiar with it. And it took a few months after he said it for me to actually try it out myself. But I've found that one, it's very useful it's very useful in terms of one, giving you a drawing board or at least a draft of what you're doing if you're trying to create, or improving something that you've already had. But what I'm trying to get across is you don't want to essentially just put something in the chat GPT or any of these LLMs and just take it let that take you from start to finish without putting your human touch on it. So I think it's very important to still put the human touch on it, whether it's more towards the beginning or more towards the end. And I'll say something else from McKinsey. They actually incorporated their own LLM. I think it's called Lily. I think I learned about it after I'd already left. So I think they may have been doing work on it while I was there, but it wasn't really known until I think this would may have been the end of 2023-ish or so, or going into 2024. But yeah, so it's definitely it's everywhere. And I was following a few email groups or email, essentially a few AI email listservs where one of the things that stood out to me was this. So it's not going to be AI versus humans. It's going to be humans with AI versus humans not using AI. Right? That's the way we kind of have to look at it, and that goes right in tandem with what I was saying earlier about I think we should be using it, not we should be using it along with our own brains.
Right.
Yeah,
In the sense that kind of almost democratize creativity because I know
yeah,
a lot
absolutely.
of people that are in kind of the creative space can, write up, their entire draft and then put it into, an AI model and be like, hey, like help me improve it. Maybe make it more X, Y, and Z, maybe make it more happy, maybe make it more relatable to this type of person. And then I know too on the other end is, when you're responding back to clients and stuff, I know a lot of people literally, copy and paste the email chains or whatever, or even have, even email plugins like with Gemini. You use AI to write and respond to emails a lot more. I I know some of my friends that are in Japan and also down here in Latin America, and their Japanese or their Spanish is not amazing, but then they put it in AI and they're like, oh wow, like this really helped me
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much. Like it, um,
absolutely.
but
I think that there are two dangers. There are multiple dangers. We know the dangers of AI. The best use of it would be, I already mentioned, one, using it along with what we're thinking, but two, using it to make us be more efficient in what we're doing, not use it to the point where essentially a simple email becomes you spend an hour trying to craft the perfect email. Rather, when if you've done it by yourself, you probably would have taken 10, 15 minutes, right? Like I would say, let's say if it's going to still take 10 to 15 minutes, then that email should be better. But ideally, you want to save on time and increase quality simultaneously. So that's the sort of use, that's the sort of best use case, I would say, for
yeah, I mean,
AI.
and kind of um, here at Gilder and like kind of what you mentioned before, like kind of an interesting use case for AI for businesses is like, uh, sales automation, like LinkedIn Outreach. Really, you can, create LinkedIn, campaigns and, reach out to a lot of folks and get connected to a lot of folks and have, automated messaging. Obviously, it's not the creative component of AI. It's not actually, thinking for you and sending it. It just sends the same copy basically and then customizes it with the name of the company. But that saves. For a lot of companies and a lot of people, that saves almost like a full-time hire at
Yeah,
way.
exactly.
10 years ago, you'd have to pay someone $40,000 a year to do that. Now you can use an AI tool that, costs $150 a month or something like that. So,
Yeah. And that's a good point. If I were to piggyback off of that thread right there, which you're saying, of course, if you essentially project that out to the company level, companies may be thinking, hey, there are a couple alternatives. Instead of having these employees, we could use AI to do this thing. That's one way of looking at it, but I think a better alternative would be to really think of how best can we use our current workforce to, let's say, double or triple our output in probably less time and increase quality. I think that's where we have to remember, because the human element, you cannot fully remove or negate or take out. And I think a lot of people will suffer if they think, or companies on the whole will suffer if they think that they can just leave these people out of it, and their brand will still be okay and their productivity will still be okay. Yeah, I think we have to think a little bit more comprehensively.
I 100% agree, and, I'm kind of a little background on me, I'm half Japanese, come from a Japanese culture, and I feel like a lot of their ethos is being as efficient as possible, being as
Yeah,
optimal as possible. Granted, their work
Kaizen, right?
culture, yeah, Kaizen. Granted,
Yeah.
their work culture is horrendous. I know that they have to stay until their senpai works. Ultimately, they do work, they focus on that efficiency. The Caribbeans, I've only been to Dominican Republic, and I think I've actually only been to Dominican Republic. Um, how how is the culture like in Bahamas? It seems very beautiful, beachy, relaxed. Um, is there how kind of what I'm asking is where did you find that root of, optimality and efficiency and organization? Was it rooted from your Bohemian cultures, or did you learn that along the way throughout your career?
So it's not rooted per se in my Bahamian culture because, as you already noted, or across the Caribbean, we're pretty laid back, chill. People go to the Caribbean to lay back and relax. So on vacation. So, but coincidentally, or maybe ironically in this case, I did pick it up in the Bahamas because remember I mentioned Borco where I was at. So the principle, they Vopak had a few principles that that they had essentially tenets or values for their company. But the one that really stood out to me was continuous improvement. And also, while I was at Borco, I did lean process improvement. So there you go with the efficiency. So I picked up the efficiency there, picked up their major principle of continuous improvement. And those are things that I've just used ever since on in many other ventures. So
I think a lot of people kind of get to a certain level in their career and they either plateau, they become stagnant. What does kind of continuous improving and continuous lifelong learning mean to you, and why do you continue to strive on being a lifelong learner?
great question. Continuous improvement means for me to that one, I should be identifying the areas of my life that are the most important and at least maintaining, but ideally trying to improve upon them. And I'll say try to improve because I remember Shaq quoting this. I don't know if it was originally from Shaq or he was quoting someone else, but he said Shaquille O'Neal, basketball player. He said something to the fact of, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, right? Like I may be paraphrasing here, but that's essentially what he communicated. And that is essentially that's where the continuous improvement comes in. Because if you're not getting better, particularly as we age, as things decay, then the natural order is for things to go into disarray. And so if you're not improving it somehow, if you're thinking you're staying the same, you're actually falling behind because circumstances are changing, the world is advancing, and so you're essentially regressing. So continuous improvement is one, as I said, identifying the areas that are most important to you, whether that's family life, economics, physical health, mental health, identifying those areas, whatever the most important things are for you, and just striving a little bit every day, regularly, and regular intervals at least, but daily to try to do something to improve. So let's say I'm going for a run. I know last time I ran 4 miles in, let's say, um, let's say for me right now, probably about like 36, 38 minutes, because I'm recuperating from an injury. But like next time I go for a run, I want to cut down by like 20 seconds, right? So that's same distance, 20 seconds less. And so that's continuous improvement. And one that's because you use metrics to continuously improve, so therefore you record where you're at and you try to improve somehow. And then um, so that's what continuous improvement and how do you not get stagnant? How do you continue learning is another thing that you mentioned. Of course, you can get information from numerous ways. Reading books is the traditional way of doing it. Listening to podcasts is another way. You can also listen to audiobooks and get information. But I've also found that being out there in the field, for instance, like interacting with, uh, for instance, as an investor, interacting with founders and learning about their technology helps sharpen my toolkit, my understanding, and it leaves me a little bit better for the next interaction for a similar founder, or even technology that may be more parallel, not the exact type, but maybe in a similar realm. So I think one, the actual process of doing, if you're paying attention and you're like recording or like being aware, you have the opportunity to improve as well. So, of course, you have the traditional methods, as I said, reading books, listening to. You can actually go out there and do and record as you do. And then, of course, you can take time to either pursue a degree or go in a quick training course or check out a webinar. I think all these things are important. And I'll tell you a little bit of some of my tricks. I already told you I've been exercising daily, and this is now going on 6 years, I think now. Uh, and so, in addition to that, what I try to do, I play these like mental games with Elevate, right? And so I got onto this from a grad school friend, a roommate. He's like, "Hey, you should try this. Check this out." And at some point, like I like to keep my streak. So right now I'm probably at about maybe 380 days of Elevate, and I do 5 games a day. Right, that could take anywhere from 7 minutes to 25 minutes. Because what I like to do is I like to try to not get an error. So if I get an error, I restart. So that also gives me more reps in order to get better at that particular game. And that relates to a quote by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he said, reps and sets, reps and sets. Another quote, which is similar to a grad school PI I came across, said, iterate to be great, right? Reps and sets, iterate to be great. Those are things that's how you continuously improve. And particularly in the realms, if you've identified particularly the realms in which you want to improve on or at least maintain, by doing things like that, you can really get a stay on top of your game and
I
not
love all those.
plateau.
Right, right, right. I love all those quotes. I love kind of the mentality of doing little by little, day by day, continuous improvement. And, eventually it's kind of returning on compounding interest, and it'll almost be a hockey stick curve as far as whatever you're learning, whatever you're that kind of point where you're learning. I mean, I get if you kind of get what I'm saying. I kind of
Of
explained.
course, yeah, 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 of course.
But kind of going back to, what you're currently doing, Gad. Um, you're talking to a bunch of founders every single day. You are an investor as well. What what kind of got you into that? And how did you? Yeah, actually, yeah. What got you into that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, a few things that I already mentioned. While at McKinsey, I did things such as due diligence. So we were working with investors there. McKinsey has a reputation for churning out people who are like high producers, particularly in the finance world and in leadership generally. So we because we own that consulting toolkit that I mentioned, it makes us attractive to some other people, both on the buy side and the sell side. Where you think of some people go into investment banking, some people go into being an investor or like a private equity. Um, and so I was contacted by, I actually through the bullpen. Through the bullpen, I met with Andy Shabo. And he was the one who put me into contact with um, Grander, Grander Investment. And so, therefore, I had an intro to the CEO and COO. He thought that they could use my services, and they agreed with him after. Well, they we met. They liked my background. We spoke for a bit. So there you have the kind of the client hands, or you could say the soft skills, or the ability to interact and build rapport. And then they had a project that they were currently looking at, and they asked me to do some work on it, and the quick iterations that I've told you about, and then also the financial modeling, the Excel analysis, all that came into play. So they liked my work, and they quickly turned that into a contractual role. So I'm helping them with their life sciences assets. So not only do they like those skills, but they also like the fact that I have a PhD in molecular biology, which which allows me to better understand and therefore assess and evaluate some of their life sciences assets. And so, yeah, that's how I got into it. I've been enjoying it. It's quite recent, but I've been enjoying it so far. Working with someone like Andy, who is an investment banker for decades. They're very structured, very good guidance coming particularly from Andy, and they have very high standards of what they look for in when it comes to financial modeling and assessing deals. And so, yeah, it's been great. It's been good.
We have a we have quite a few listeners. I mean, most of our listeners are founders, but we might have a couple that are in the life sciences space.
Okay,
As far as the type of deal flow and what your investor thesis is, what kind of things are you looking for in
absolutely.
a startup to invest in?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give you a quick overview. We're currently looking more health tech, longevity, med tech, and med device, essentially. So those are some more for Grindr right now. We're not opposed to therapeutics, but therapeutics typically has a longer window to one market or two a potential exit. So if there are life sciences companies, let's say biotechs and more pharma companies that are looking for funding, but they have a potential exit that's in the next 3 to 5 years. They're also potential. They're also good candidates for us to be chatting with.
Awesome. And then another just quick question, since you're kind of right, in the, you know, in the front of every type of innovation in life sciences, what do you think the next, big type of innovation in biopharmaceuticals and life sciences in the next 10, 20 years?
10, 20 years.
How about 10 years?
Yeah, yeah, no worries. Yeah, you could even say 5, 10 years, but
Yeah, 5, 10 years.
this is not going to be new to anybody, but AI is going to play a massive role, right? I mean, you already see it. I think the last 2 years, particularly 2023, 2024, I mean, so much of the funding was going to companies that just put AI in their name, even whether or not they were utilizing it well. I think now is around the time the rubber's going to hit the road because a lot of companies have already jumped on to the AI bandwagon. The question now is who's going to do it best, and in a use case that drives the most impact for either patients and or investors, really. And so, yeah, that I think it's going to one AI is going to play an important role. I'll say that. And two, I think you're going to probably find companies that we know who the big players when we think of biotech and pharma, we know who the big players with the big TAs or therapeutic areas are. I think the people who will probably make the biggest splash in the increases will probably be not from some of the bigger ones. They'll probably be the ones who have the most traction, either with proprietary data that they can use AI to do what they're doing on mixed along with their research in a TA that people probably aren't looking at, right? And it may
So
especially if
what
you're
does
thinking
TA
of
mean?
maybe
Sorry, like
next
a
four
TA.
years.
What does a TA
Sorry,
mean?
therapeutic area.
Okay, therapeutic. Got it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. especially if you're thinking over the next 4 years, you have to kind of look at what this administration is putting focus on. So I was listening to a podcast recently, as I do, as I admitted to you, um, on pronatalism. So essentially, what that is like people who believe you should have as many kids as possible, right? And it might seem far fetched, but if you think about it, Trump is one who has a lot of kids. I think I learned that Elon actually has over 13, over 14 kids at this point. And even JD Vance has 3 kids, which is a little bit more than average in the US right now, especially for someone his age. So if you think of that in the life sciences space, if you're thinking of things like fertility or the anything along the lines that would could play into that. I mean, these are the I'm just giving you a sort of a rubric or a way in which to think. I'm not necessarily stating this one will just blow up, but
Medical.
that's the sort of thinking that I would put into
I
uh potential
I
investments.
right. I even think, you know, at least in like Japan, South Korea, and the United States is another example. I think the aging
Yeah,
population is
exactly.
another big focus.
Exactly.
So there's
That is another big that's right. That's right. So
yeah,
like expanding longevity, expanding lifespan of the tail
yeah.
end as well.
People would be
Um,
willing to spend wealthy people would be willing to spend infinite amount of money if they can live.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
but Gad, we're kind of coming up on time here. Do you have any final words of wisdom or advice to share to our listeners?
Yes, I will say to the founders out there, it is often difficult. I will say when you're looking at investors, I want you to think of the long time frame. Think of it as building relationships, not necessarily just even if you're trying to if you're courting someone, you don't necessarily go up to them on the first date and ask them to marry you. Think of it the same way with investors. You know, you make your case, you give your pitch, you stay in contact. If they give you feedback, you iterate, you stay in contact. I think that's sort of the mindset you're going to have. And of course, you're going to have to make many pitches. Don't get discouraged. You're going to have to make a lot of iterations, changes on your deck, your materials in general. But and this current market is kind of unpredictable. We don't know. But if you can weather it out um, and maintain those relationships over time as you continuously improve, right? I think you can have a potential for a decent next stage, whether it's an exit or like getting the funding that you desire. So yeah,
Awesome. Well, Gad, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on the Killer Spotlight podcast, and looking forward to, many more another amazing conversations.
thank you so much, Taiga. Take care.
Thank you.